All right, so let's jump onto our Flutterflow side to set up the API call. Let's go into these API calls tab. And I have already set up a API calls group. Group basically is a very convenient way for you to have multiple different API calls under the same base URL. And also you can just share the tokens and everything across all the calls. So it's a good way to set up multiple endpoints to the same service, which is our ideate.xyz service. But if you're using a free account, you probably don't have this API group feature. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you can easily set up a single call with API call. So let's add that API call and we can name it ideate create design. And the method type, we can go into our playground, open up our example code, and we're looking for method, right? So pretty much all the information you need to set up the API call on the Flutterflow side, you can actually grab them from our example code. So the method is post. So let's put that as post. In the API URL, simply you can grab that from here. That's the URL we're going to use. And now we want to configure the header. So this is where we actually pass in our API key here. So let's quickly just copy these over. But what we need to do is we want to replace, first delete the quotation marks. We want to replace this $ idea API key with our own API key, which you can grab from the account tab, copy your API key, come back, paste it in here. And that's that. Let's quickly save the progress here. And let's go back to playground, view code. And then now we want to pass in like a body, which is a JSON type. And we can simply do that on our body tab, select type JSON. And we want to add in the body information here. And as we have previously covered, two things that we need to pass in are template ID and edits. So we can quickly just copy this entire object in here. And what we need to do is we actually want to wrap template ID in a double quotation mark, edits in a double quotation mark, and want to format that. So Flutterflow has a really good feature to format the structure for us. So it is very readable. So now let's quickly hit save. And now we need to think about, okay, what do we want to pass in here that can dynamically populate our designs? So for template ID, because on the UI side, we know that we are going to make it dynamic. So let's delete that for now and just leave the structure as a kind of like a placeholder so we can see the entire structure of our JSON body. And now let's think about what edits we want to make. So for dates, for this tutorial, we're not going to make any style updates. Let's come into our documentation first. So we know that date is a text element, right? Here are all the things that we can make edits via our API call. But for this tutorial, I'm only going to be changing the value. So basically passing in the text to be displayed on that design. So what we can add is value, column, and give it a double quotation mark as a placeholder for now. And we can format that to make it readable. And same as date. So event name and also location, I'm also gonna populate the value for those two as well. So these are all the edits I'm gonna make to the text elements on this design. And in terms of image, event image, let's go back here. We know that for image, these are all the edits that we can make. So first of all, we want to dynamically populate the image URL. So let's quickly do that. And because I don't want to kind of pass in an actual image URL, I actually want the endpoint to help me generate new images for a very personalized experience for our user, right? So every time they create their own event, we actually generate a bespoke image for their event. So what we want to do is we want to make it into an object. And we want to pass in two things. First is the prompt. And second, we want to pass in a style. and we want to format that. Yep. So these is the basic structure that we want to pass. We want to post to our API endpoint. And what we're going to do next is we don't want to populate them like these because otherwise they are static, they are not dynamic. So we want to make all of these values and prompt styles very dynamic. So basically they're selected or configured by the users when they're interacting with your app. So what we want to do is make them into variables. So we know that we have template ID, a date value, image prompt, image style, event name value, and location value, right? So we want to make them all into variables. Event name, that's the first thing. String, template ID, that's another thing. Make it string. Image prompt, I want to make it into a string. Image style, make it into a string. And event date, make it into a string, and event location. I'm gonna make it into a string. So now we can save it and come back to the body tab. We can see all the variables that we can pass in, and now we just want to drag them into the slot that we want to slot them in. So for example, template ID, we'll drag them here. Date, event date value here, event location here, event name here, image prompt here, image style here. So one thing we can do with the image style is if we come back to our image style, all of the style path basically has IDA / as the prefix. So one trick like we can do is we can just add that in here. So when we pass image style, we can essentially only pass in what's following IDA /. So for example, these, I'm going to show you that later. And this is pretty much the setup for our API call. Let's do a quick test. And we also want to set up the response JSON path as a shortcut, so we can use them very easily later in our front end. So event name, let's say Tokyo Tech Meetup. Template ID, we can simply either grab it here, or we can go into our playground and then get the template ID from here. Pass it in there. Image prompt, let's say Tokyo Sky Tree. An image style, what we want, let's do an abstract image style this time. So if we go to the body tab, you can see that if I delete that, the prefix is there, but then if I pass it in there, the abstract is just there. So this makes it very easy for us to later configure the UI side. So essentially we can ignore the IDA /. And we can then populate the event date. Then we can populate the event date, which let's say 18th November 2024. Event location will be Tokyo, Japan. And let's hit test API call. Looks like it's working. And now we have received a couple things back. First of all, status. 200 means that's successful, and you can tell it's successful because we actually received a data object back, which contains a design ID and also a URL. So design ID is what we're going to use later to make further edits to this design, for example, shuffling an image. That's something we want to keep in our hand so we can use it later on. And for URL, this is essentially the URL we can, hold on. This is the URL we can retrieve the image from. So these two things are very important for us on the front end. So we want to keep them for the display the design to our user, or to keep it so that the user can make further edits to our design. So what we want to do is we want to keep data design ID, data URL as two JSON paths that we can easily use later on. So let's add that JSON path and name it design ID. and also add the URL as image URL, and I want to change the type to image path. And now let's save our API call. So yeah, this is the setup for the API call. Everything is set up correctly. And if you want to make further edits, for example, if you want to change the font of the date, you can refer to our API doc for text element. If you want to change the font, maybe the font, yeah. So you simply input font, and for the font options, you can refer to this list of fonts that you can pass in. For example, if you do PT mono here, and you format that. Let's just do a quick example. This is basically how you want to add new properties in to configure the design further. So if we test the API code now, you can see that the body has font PT mono in there. And when we receive the design back, let's copy this design URL. Yeah. It might not be very obvious, but you can see that the date font has been changed to PT mono. So this is how you actually configure even further. So yeah, I'm gonna delete these because I don't want to edit that for our use case. So yeah, so this is a quick walkthrough of how you set up the API by referring to what we have on the playground side, the example code, and also our documentation side. So when we talk about the UI, how to hook it up with the UI and logics, I'm actually going to use what I have set up here with my API call. Just because everything is hooked up, I'm just going to quickly walk them through. Now let's move on to our front end and give you guys a walkthrough on how everything has been set up.